My presentation is a little different, and I'm going to let it unravel. The thing that I'm going to be talking about is actually the art and science of health. Now, what's really interesting is everyone in this room is 99.9% genetically similar. And yet, here we have an expression that's absolutely unique in each one of you. Now, the question that we have to ask is, we're at the epitome of the evolutionary pyramid. In fact, we are the epitome of our evolutionary design from the ape, right? So why are we, why do we have problems like cancer? Why do we have diabetes? And that's the question I'd like to confront today. And in the presentation, I will unravel the story of how we began to co-create to find solutions around this. So this is an interesting one, the current scenario, which everybody is aware of. But what I'd like you to see is the individual behavior. The reason that we can't change our habituations is the reason that we fall sick, 40%. Genetics, 30%. So yes, you have your blueprint that you come into the world with, and that has some consequence on what would happen to you. And the other one is healthcare, and social and environmental issues is 20%. Now, in the next course of the slides, what you'll see is how we can influence all of this, right? And not have cancer, not have diabetes, and also create optimal children, if you will. There's a very interesting story because you're all designers. Perfect genetics, like the supermodels and all the actresses and actors that we have, are a consequence of genetic momentum. And what I mean by this is their faces and their physiology is all based on the golden ratio, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Now, to get the perfect golden ratio, your environment of your grandparents and your parents have to have had a positive environmental influence, which includes food, because food is the information that goes into your body and is translated by your genetic blueprint. So let's get away from food as just sustenance. What if you look at it as information? The information of what's happening in our planet is in that food, how we imbibe it, and how it then interacts with our genes, and something else that I'll introduce you shortly to, our microbiome. This is a slide that I really don't have to take anyone through. Everyone has had the experience of losing someone to cancer or diabetes or any one of those issues, right? It's more just a consequence slide. Okay. So this is what we propose. India has over 1 billion people, but we have less than 0.2% of our population genetically mapped. So every design of any medication, every design of anything from your X-ray to your CT scan has actually no relevance to your own personal DNA, which is quite interesting because we're an ancient race with our own mutations, which are unique only to us. However, we are not designing for us. We are taking block designs and then putting it upon ourselves, right? So in a way, we're doing ourselves a design disservice. So let me talk to you a little about the Genomics Blueprint. Now, when I say Genomics Blueprint, that's exactly what it is. It's a probability chart. It's a probability of everything that you can express in your life, right? So there is no diabetic gene. You have the propensity of using sugar in a certain way. Now, let me frame that story a little differently for you. If, for example, you have diabetes, it's because you have the ability to create and have more sugar in your body, right? It's the fact that we're not utilizing it that becomes a problem. So let's go back, 1,000 years. We have a famine, but you have this gene that actually can have a more, say more sugar in your body. That would be the one that saved you. That's the one that helped you evolve. And we switch that story a little bit and say all we do is eat sugar every day. And obviously that's going to be a problem, right? So that's an environmental problem. It's not a problem of the human DNA. So what helped us survive is now killing us. Now, you can't blame the environment. It's something that we created. So let me put it to you like this. Our genetic sustainability is equivalent to our environmental sustainability. So if you're not able to address the environmental sustainability, you can't address your genetic sustainability. Uh, so this is the idea on the genetics. Now, how can genetics help everyone? You know, the problem with genetics is like it's sort of mystical in a sense, right? You have it and they're using for oncogenes, which is all for cancer. So how can you, me, I mean, how can we use it every day in a very tangible, simple way? So let me give you an example. Coffee. We all drink coffee. But for some of us, coffee is hugely detrimental. And for some of us, it's actually very therapeutic. And you know, there's no way we can actually figure this out other than if you have coffee in the evening and you can't sleep, that's probably a good indication of that, right? Things like that. Let me give another example. When I was young, we had no genetics. So the symptom would be asthma, right? So they'd call you an asthmatic. Actually, what's really interesting with genetics is if you have to go to the root of the story, I can't break down polycyclic hydrocarbons, which basically means anything to do with smoke, I'm done. So say I smoke for two months, I have cancer. Interestingly, I stayed away from it just because you know, it never suited me. But it's a different story, isn't it? It's not smoking that's a killer. It's the fact that I cannot break down a certain kind of hydrocarbon. A very different story. So, you know, you actually know how to act in your reality, right? And so that's sort of a brief genetic story for you. The microbiome. Now, this is the ultimate symbiosis. All of us sitting over here today have only I think we have 1 trillion human cells. You have 10 trillion microbiome cells in your body. And what I mean by the microbiome is bacterial cells. Your skin is full of it. Your airways are full of it. Your gut is full of it. And what's really interesting is that they influence so many things that we're unaware of it. And again, it's something that no one is actually designing for, not our environment, and we ourselves are not aware of it, right? So let me give you a good example of the microbiome. You know all these cases of depression? Oh, here's what's interesting. 80% of your serotonin is made in your gut. So that's interesting, isn't it? So you have a neurotransmitter directly dealing with depression that's made in your gut. So now, it's interesting that we can take a pill and that goes away. Or you can change your design environment and the way you imbibe or interact with information, right, in the world, and you're fine. Which is why it becomes an interesting proposition. Some of the other things that actually come out is, you know, from your genetics, nobody is fat. You may have a propensity to have a greater amount of fat tissue. That's it. No one can be fat. You can't look at a blueprint of DNA and say you're obese. There's no such thing. But here's what's interesting. You do a shotgun sequencing of your gut, and you have a 90% percentile that they can call you and say you are obese. They don't ever have to look at you. Just look at your gut microbes, and they can call you fat. It's very interesting because it's an area that we don't address. But let me take you back to our story of Ayurveda. We address everything from the gut, all the elixirs, you know, everything else that we actually have. It's very intriguing because we have one of the oldest cultures, right? I mean, think about the buttermilk, your yogurt, all of that, right? And funnily enough, we have the most consolidated fermentation strategy, but we don't use it to actually cure ourselves. Each one of those fermented products are a cure in your hand, right? And unfortunately, we have no access to it or no knowledge of it, right? So what are we doing? What we do is we began to do the analysis of all the gut microbes in India. If you said 0.2% of our population is mapped in terms of genetics, we have nothing in microbiome. So we began to map this. But there's a whole human microbiome project happening in the West. So what we began to do is look at this, and we got like 150 case studies, and then we began to study the gut. And we were intrigued to find out that our gut diversity is phenomenal, obviously, because we interact with an environment full of it. But here's what's also interesting. The northern gut microbiome, the western one and the southern one, completely different based on our foods. Now that was interesting, right? So where is this one cure fits all thing happening? So then so you're saying also anthropologically, we come from different time periods, different migrations, different environments, and all of this shapes us. All of us who walked into this room today, you all sat in those chairs. Now here's what's really interesting. Your microbiome and your unique fingerprint of your microbiome will stay in that chair for the next 3-4 days. If they take a test of you and they match it with the chair, they can match you exactly, even better than a fingerprint. That's how unique your individual microbiome is, right? But we're not designing for any of this, are we? Right? And the design is simple. How do we get this into the world of, it's not nutrition, it's nourishment. It's the whole thing, right? It's not just a number of calories, in and out, exercise. It's not that. It's way beyond that, right? It's the way you're able to break down your fats. It's the way you're able to cure yourself of disease, because 80% of your immunity, guess where it is? It's your gut. If you know, if anybody has had the experience of being with a cancer patient, today the recent therapies that are coming out, it's called immunotherapy. What is that all about? It's about how your gut microbes are creating T regulatory cells, which are basically, your own white cells that can go and target and, fight the disease. So is there a possible preventative methodology that can be integrated into the design of our existence itself? That's why we came up with something called the health exchange. So all the stuff that I'm telling you, impossible, because if you look at a doctor's time or a nutritionist's time or anyone, impossible to get all this information across to everyone at the same time. We can't re-educate. But what we can do is, with the advent of AI, machine learning, right? These tools, all this information is available to everyone on this, right? So anyone has access to this information. So we are essentially making the information open source. What we're doing is creating these platforms around this open source information so people can design freely around this platform. So let me give you a good example. The pelvis. So we took all this Indian data from a DEXA scan. A DEXA scan is the one that does your bone and your muscle plus your visceral fat. What's really intriguing about it is we put, I think, 400 different tests for the first time, Indian data, into our AI. And what we came up with is that the start and the stop of osteoporosis starts from your pelvis, which was really interesting. So osteoporosis starts from the pelvis, right? And everybody has somebody who's had a hip fracture. So you know what's really interesting? In this room itself, everyone would have known somebody who has a hip fracture. And you know why? And this is the most bizarre thing. This is the lifestyle design that we're talking about, right? It's because we stopped squatting. It's as simple as that. We're all sitting on a chair. This is not how we were designed anthropologically. Anthropology suggests that as you squat and get up, it's a squat, right? But more than that, even the way we use the toilet has changed. Is this design affecting us? Certainly so. Japan, so I went back and checked the research on Japan. 16% osteoporosis in Japan, because in Japan, they still squat. They still are on their knees, right? I mean, they're in Vajrasana all the time. It's very intriguing to see that actually we had the design process called yoga, I don't know, thousands of years ago. We've just forgotten all these realities, right? So in a way, all this information is just leading us to one truth. What your grandmother did is probably more healthy than anything that we're doing right now. So this is the co-creation platform, and what I mean by this is we're able today, with this data at the back end and these learnings, a university may put out 100 papers, a year. This data is constantly going into our system. India's got Ayurveda, we've got Unani medicine, we've got Siddhi. I mean, we have so many things. There are so many people curing cancer with herbology, but nobody ever hears about them. Now imagine if we could get the data for that herbology into a relevant platform. So say somebody gets cured by cancer by having this bark. By the way, we have a couple of those in the southern part of India that I'm aware of. Now this bark has got hundreds of case studies. They have blood work before, blood work after. But there's no one who will approve them. That's what the problem is, because you can't take that single molecule out of that bark. It costs a prohibitive amount of money. So what happens? The guy sells it to his environment. It's done, it's gone. How many people miss out on the utility of that bark, that plant? So what we do is actually go to all of them, take all their data, and they all have blood tests, by the way. Everybody has blood tests, scans, all of this. Everybody's checking all the time. We take all of that. We upload it into our AI, right? And it throws up all your data. And if you have like over 200, 300, it's actually a university publication. So what we did is now tied up with the universities as well. So when we find one of those, you also have co-author the publication. But this is happening in real time. And we have Indian data coming out that you can respond to immediately. Not wait for 8 years by the time something's approved and everything is done. You can respond today, right? And this is the kind of power that we have to bring to design, because it's the time lag that's killing us. It's nothing else, right? So consumer needs. When you look at a consumer, it's anyone, right? It could be a community. It could be a single person. Now here's the problem with it. If you go and you have a cancer community, you have a unique set of problems that are only relevant to you. Now, remember the first part was behavior. The problem with many of these things is there's no support system. Yes, the family, but what if nobody in the family has cancer? It becomes something that you face alone. What happens if nobody in the family has diabetes? It becomes something you face alone. It's only a community can do this. So on this platform, you also have communities that we've created. So you have a problem, but you have the relevant information, and you're discussing the same problem with each other, which suddenly makes that behavioral change, right? Hey, come on. We have behavioral changes for everything. You can sell, a Ferrari to someone based on behavioral design. You mean to say we can't do something like a small behavioral change based on it? We have the tech to do it. We have the science to do it. So the only question is, why won't we do it, right? And that's the design process that technology actually begins to give us because, now we need to see everything. The difference is, in the old days, we trusted nature. Today, nothing. Give me data. So great. You have a biofeedback in your hand, and only then I know I'm meditating. Otherwise, I'm not. I'm closing my eyes. Actually, it's interesting. It works for you and works against you, okay? So in this situation, that's exactly what we do. Say somebody is meditating, and the assumption that you're meditating, you may be just closing your eyes unless you're able to influence the brain waves, right? But today we have the tech to see whether you're influencing your brain waves. So if you know how you do that and you know the way that works for you, there you go. Now here's the other one. Say, for example, the way you breathe. Pranayama is not going to work for everyone. That's the other thing that we've realized. We're looking at data, and we're looking at the heart rate variability, and we're looking at the way they're actually breathing. No same way of breathing works for two different people. And you're like, wow, who would have thought? Because we all think that, one size fits all. No, it doesn't actually. Everything is a personal design, but there are clues of how we could make that into a community. Yep, and this is the solutions that we come up with. So the solutions that we come up with is data that everybody can access. It's free, the platform's free, right? So when you come in, all of you can upload your data. You can join your communities. So in a way, it's like sort of a Facebook, but only relevant to you, and it has data and real-time response, right, and which is what we want. And we help you build your communities. Now, a small point on this. The design process has to start in the soil for the microbiome. There's something called the dilution of food. If there's no microbiome or microbiology going into the food, and there's only fertilizer going into the food, unfortunately, that's what's going to be happening in your gut, right? Remember, I told you the gene sustainability theory. Now, the funny part of this is that microbiome that's going into the earth is the one that's stimulating your blueprint, right, to produce or create whatever gender that you need. So this is that variability that we've created. Unless we're able to address that, you won't be able to address the other situation. Suddenly, organic food seems very exciting, but not just organic food. How do we then create the right circumstances for the right microbes to come in at a ground level and all the way up? So this is the community. So what we've actually done is, in Bangalore, where we're based, we've got production clusters where we actually give them the microbiome that will help with growth. But the same microbiome keys in the same genetics in the plant, which are then you imbibe, and then it keys in your genetics. So the idea of therapy suddenly becomes very interesting, right? So you have the blockchain that actually shows you the whole sequence where everything comes from, whether they're using it, whether they're not using it, and we also deal with performance athletes. So today, we're using our own anthropology to key our Olympians, because in Bangalore, we have a performance lab. And in this performance lab, we have Paralympians, we have Olympians, and guess what? We're not using protein shakes for them. We're using our anthropology of food. We're using our genetics. We're using our nutrients. And you know what? The results are phenomenal, right? Anyway, that's sort of the idea behind it. Let me tell you an application of space. In this room, we're all sitting here, and every couple of minutes, each one of us are breathing out 37 million microbes in aerosol form. Basically, we're infecting the hell out of each other, right? And that's pretty much what happens in a group like this. The thing that's helping you is your immunity and your gut microbes that are in your gut. Now, we also are surrounded by a ventilation. And there are many architects here, so I'm sure they know what's happening with that. One of the interesting parts of this is mold, one of the most dangerous things that you can actually have. Now, if you have that somewhere inside the ventilation system, the cost is prohibitive to actually go in there and pull everything out and redesign that. Today, they have microspheres with the counter microbiome or microbiology of what's in that. So all you have to do is spray the microbiology, these spheres, through the ventilation, and it cleans out the bad mold or whatever it is that you have. Very cost effective, it's just biology, and it doesn't harm you, right? So you're talking about solutions that are so different, but it's all design solutions. It's biological solutions. So that's pretty much what we're looking at, right? What you see over here is very simple. It's blue zones. What we realize is there's something called blue zones. It's where we have the most number of centenarians. What happens in these areas is that they have amazing health spans and they have amazing lifespans. So this guy called Dan Buettner went there and figured out, okay, how come these guys live so long? So there are places in Okinawa, in Karkaria in Greece, in Sardinia, and some places in China. And one of the things they found out is these guys are not getting up in the morning and working out. I mean, they're just living naturally. They're walking a little bit. You know, they're picking their own vegetables. They're drinking a lot of wine in the afternoon. You know, this is the kind of life they're actually doing. It's not your everyday workout, right? So that was interesting as well. So how do you design in the space a natural movement, anthropology? I mean, maybe, you know, as you're walking, I mean, how do you design the space itself to work for you? The green areas that you see are wetlands, because the wetland microbe is quite interesting. Let me give you a wetland that's static is actually much better for the microbiome for the simple reason. Every time you turn your shower on, it's an aerosol as well, because you know, the water is being sprayed under pressure. Now imagine that you have a pneumonia bacteria hiding in the shower cap. You just sprayed an aerosol of bacteria all over the room. And this is not every day when you're in your house. It's no problem because you're using it every day. But the holiday homes, you know, when you go back to your other houses or something that's less used, an off-season hotel, those are dangerous because the microbes can actually develop over a period of time. Now, that's the kind of design process that we're talking about, right? And that's so simple to actually put in. So now, let's go there and say, okay, let's say we have a waterfall. Actually, that's an aerosol, isn't it? So it depends on what you're going to be putting in it that makes a difference. So if you put in chlorine over there, guess what you're putting out in the air? And now we have drug-resistant bacteria, and the bacteria are really smart, right? So they evolve faster than we do. So those are the green spaces. And it's a simple example of how we actually do it. Now, this is another interesting one. The advent of technology gives us so many benefits, but also there are certain evils in it. One of the problems with cancer is that many people are sensitive to radiation, your phones. And everybody's sort of aware of it, but not sure what to do. So one of the things that we came up with is working with a company. We came up with a way of shielding the buildings using primer. Because my office was opposite 4 telephone towers, and I was having 15,000 watts of radiation. The permissible is 3,000. So that was quite interesting, right? You're talking about health, but you know, you could be doing all the running, fighting, shooting, everything else, and then you come and you sit in your office for 6 hours, and you're getting cooked. So that was an interesting thing, right? So what happened is you just got to put a primer on and this kind of stuff. So this is the kind of interventions that, you know, living design is. It's very, very tangible. It's very, very simple. It's something everybody can do at home. And it's completely data-driven. I mean, we're talking about the best evidence-based medicine, but to make a lifestyle change that's based on your own evolution, your own anthropology. So these are all the companies that we created. And if you notice the first thing, one of the big ones was behavior. Life sciences, so we're actually doing, like we're using aquatic plants to clean, we're using microbes to clean, so that we can actually get all the stuff out and actually give you a positive microbial revolution, if you will, right? So we're in healthcare and genetics and the performance lab, because what we realize is in performance, the aggregation of marginal gains is 3 or 4%. So if I have to take a top athlete and give him 4%, that means he breaks the world record for the marathon, you know, a couple of days ago. I mean, that's pretty much what you can actually do, right? So that's the marginal gains. What did he eat in the morning? When did he eat? How did he eat? That's what you're looking at. But you know what? If that kind of performance can happen for an athlete, that's like a 40% change for you and me, right? Immediately off the bat. I mean, you take some of those ideas and you put it in. Because he's already performing, he's young, he's strong, and he's at the top, you know, top of his game. And that's the gold standard. So that's the kind of knowledge that we're distilling, and we're using it on them, and they are our ambassadors. And from that, and they're all Indian, and that's what makes it interesting, because there's no such thing as Indian as well. That's the other thing we figured out. So it's going to make our life more difficult. However, I mean, this is the journey that we've embarked on, and well, that's us. Thank you. So if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
It and be a part of the community?
Absolutely, because it's the idea of the platform is that, look, there's no way we can create everything. But here's the thing, right? In this room itself, we have people who are in architecture, you have people who are designing cars, environments, the World Design Organization. What it does is gives them all access to the same root data, but also it gives you access to the experts who can co-create with you. So what we did is put it on a blockchain. And the reason I say that is because if you come up with any creation on our platform, you're guaranteed, you know, the security of your innovation. Because that's the other thing that we lack, right? I mean, you come up with some amazing idea, and it's gone. Somebody is missed it. So somebody with more financial power will just overwhelm you, and you're done, right? But a blockchain is interesting, because you can keep any innovation on the platform, and anyone who utilizes it on the platform will have to give you your dividend or your royalty. So you're protected from that perspective.
And will it be helpful for a personal growth in terms of making the health better? I mean, I'm asking a very regular question because it seems very interesting. How does it help an individual? Like,
Simple. Do you have blood reports that you have? Do you have any report that you have? You upload it, right? And what it does is correlates it with your age, your data, where you're from, but it's all blockchain, so I don't know who you are, actually. That's the other thing, because we're following the international data protection, because, by the way, nobody in the world is doing this. And amazingly, we're able to do it because we're able to connect all these things in India still. So like you said, once you do that, the medium that you go through, it's very interesting also because the platforms have many mediums. Are you coming from an athletic perspective? That's why I said community. All the communities have access to the platform. But if you come from an athletic community, different intervention, right? If you come from a condition-based, I say cancer, diabetes, completely different intervention. So the first thing you do is you have the behavioral support of your community. And at the end, also, if you're, look, things, here's the truth, right? I think Dr. Batra, when he said it, he was quoting that Higher Game song. And he said, the more I learn, the less I know. You know, the human body is like that. So it's, the funny part is nobody can say that. Like, I mean, when you go to a doctor and you're stressed, he has to know what you're doing. But actually the platform, the truth is that we have 20,000 genes, out of which we know what 200 genes are doing. We have no idea what the rest are doing, right? So that's why it's a platform. So as it learns, you learn. As you evolve, it evolves. You can go back and forward. Tomorrow, if you find a cure, you become a producer on the platform, not just a consumer on the platform, right? So, I mean, I hope that answers your question.
yeah, thank you so much.
Just a comment. I think my gut feel was right that the talk was going to be interesting. You know, so for in design, gut feel is very important.
Thank you.